Om Vedanta Siddhanta Niruktiyaresha Brahmaiva Jivaham Sakalam Jagadcha Akanda Rupastiti Eva Moksho Brahmadvitiye Shrutayaha Pramanam. Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. It is the apt and final conclusion of the Vedanta that all is Brahman. Time, space, living beings, and the world. Living in constant recognition of this fact is what is called enlightenment. Brahman is pure and perfect, and one without a second. And the revealed scriptures are the sure and certain proof of this fact. And therefore, may Brahman protect us, may Brahman sustain us, may Brahman illumine our thinking process. May we not find fault with each other, with the teachings, or with the world. And may what we study be a source of inspiration to us eternally. Om, peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om Tat Sat. Well, to place a turn on a phrase, we've got to keep meeting like this. And that's because the Dharma needs to be expressed over and over again to reach all peoples of the world, according to Swami Vivekananda. He wanted to go door to door with it, maybe in less advanced countries, with a globe of the world, to get everyone out of their frog in the well consciousness and see that they were connected to this much greater thing than their village or city or so forth. We're not meant to gather in cities and living lives of fools, he said once, but to be free and to become master of this body-mind mechanism. So if we move towards that kind of lifestyle that's supported by Dharma and which abides in yoga, which we are wont to do and which we like to strive for, then you have that a testament of the scriptures and the seers. And hopefully you get supported by Guru, Dharma, and Sangha, and you place your head deep in the books called revealed scriptures, which are a part of the para vidya category of teachings. That's the supreme knowledge, and which both transcend but also open up and clarify the apara vidya level of knowledge, which is earthly knowledge, intellectual knowledge, and sort of the difference between the secular and the spiritual. Of course, we want to stay well away from the profane level of avidya, which is that knowledge which stunts and veils our vision, not only here on earth with these two eyes, but internally with the single eye. Keeps us from living in that state of yoga, which the great souls pronounce to be living in their true self. They're the ones to which belong peace, and to none else, as the Katha Upanishad repeats over and over again at the end of a set of its slokas. So these Upanishads, we were looking at them a couple weeks ago on my visit to the ashram, SRV ashram in Oregon, and then our retreat at Windward Waters. We looked into the Annapurna Upanishad, which we'll look again into in May and try and complete. This is the second to the last class of this series, having to do with mantra and karma, or how mantra destroys or neutralizes karma, and how to subject one's karmas, which are negative, mixed, and positive, all three, to the purifying effects of the mantra, so that the words, the wisdom words of Jnana Yoga and this Dharma that we've been talking about all the time, reach deep into us and have a profound effect upon us. It's a transmission that should cause a very positive transformation in us and should lead to transcendence. I think maybe we had a seminar or a class series named that some years ago, transformation, transcendence, and so forth, using those words to communicate what happens to the soul who begins to focus deeply in upon these teachings. And that's the part of the teaching chart that we are at today. We're rounding another curve in this chart, which we call Manassa Prana Sambandha, that singular word we've chosen to build this karma and mantra series of teaching classes around. And it all started out with proper eating habits, consciousness around food, and it proceeded then, as you can see by the chart in front of you now, to allow us to gain strength. That is, these channels open up. The scriptures say that prana and mind are very similar to one another. So prana can be closed down or it can be flowing. I got a question just last week from a professor who follows along very well on these classes, asking, oh, what's the difference between one person's prana and another prana? Say my prana and your prana. But I wasn't about to get personal with it, but I could say that the prana is the one prana in five forms, as Swami Vivekananda calls it, is either flowing and free of spikes and valleys, and in its more original state, as it should be in a human life, so that it can benefit human beings, or it can be stopped up, like they say, stepping on a hose, so water can't pass through it. And it's the same with these nadis that flow with energy. Sometimes the lethargy and what we call tamas in Sanskrit, or the low energy that people are feeling, comes at the physical level, because even the physical nadis are not healthy. That's why we started with food and looked to gain strength from that. There's a possibility to start with good food, eat organically, eat vegetarian, eat whatever, and still not feel that energy of prana begin to rise in you, as if the habit of depression and other weights on human consciousness have grown habitual. So that's more a problem of a mind, and that's what I want to look like as we round this corner and arrive at the subject of psychic prana. So just the prana, the consciousness, is one and indivisible and the same in everyone, but it's just a matter of whether it's flowing through these vehicles that Vedanta calls upadis, or sheaths, and yoga calls nadis, or openings that move inward, even past the physical, towards the emotional level, where there are a lot of blockages in people nowadays. We're seeing that, and for many reasons, such as the onslaught of war, or put it that way, loss of peace that you're used to, and the beginning of restlessness and brooding on sense objects. All of these things we know to be teachings in the Yoga Sutras, and in the Vedanta they both deal with them in a slightly different way. But from the physical to the emotional to the mental to the psychological to the philosophical, and then, as we will see soon, up to the very spiritual level of things, I want to address that from the standpoint of psychic prana, because it's a mention that we got from Swami Vivekananda in his Raja Yoga commentary, his commentary on the Ashtanga Yoga of Patanjali. He left that for us, as well as opening up these Upanishads to us, and also accenting the Advaita Vedanta that had been so beautifully expressed in the time of Shankara and Gaudapada, some 600, 700 years BC. I'm sorry, 600, 700 years ago. And so this profound philosophy is needing to be explored by us at many levels. So there are many levels to the human complex. Sometimes they call that a psychophysical being or a body-mind mechanism. So going back in time, studying those scriptures that have expressed these truths to us is a part of this path of manaha prana sambandha. We can look at that as I go on here, but just as a quick review, once you gain strength, then you see how the stamina increases and one can master one's posture. Weaknesses is not allowed. You can't have a spiritual life if the body and life force is weak, Vivekananda said. So you're going to have to make sure that those two things receive strength and flow. And mastering the posture is also a precursor to controlling the body, because if you can make the body follow your commands and sit in one position for a long time, like Christ did in the wilderness and Buddha did under the bo tree, there were long periods of sitting where the mind had to command the body to sit in one place, and the body followed. So you know that they had mastered a posture, and that the energy flowing through that physical mechanism was free-flowing, and it could animate or it could arrest the movements of the body, and it can do the same with the mind. That is, to stop the thoughts, for instance. We were talking about that yesterday at satsang, the pratyahara limb of yoga, to be able to not only withdraw from objects if they're giving you a problem, but also to stop the thoughts of objects if they're interfering with your meditation or with a peaceful state of mind, is a very high limb of yoga and a very powerful attainment. So you see this chart goes on, purify the senses, and we looked at that some weeks ago with several charts. You can look back on these classes and they'll be made available or being made available in one whole series. Probably be a good 9 or 10 of them by the time we're done. And then equalize the breathing. We talked about that at the retreat at Windward Waters. Just recently, the Annapurna Upanishad had a lot to say about that. And there was even something to say about it in the Upanishad we were studying in Portland, Oregon at the SRV ashram, called the Amrita Nada Upanishad. Both of them were talking about breathing, or pranayama, as being one of the key steps to higher yoga. And then prana, you can say pretty much that once these requisites are satisfied, you have a grasp upon your prana. You have a concept of it. Your breathing is equalized. The prana can flow both outwards and inwards, and it does not need to encounter blockages. Grantis, they're called in Sanskrit. If you talk about an atrophied limb and something's not working to conduct that physical prana through the nerves, it's the same with the subtle body. The mind is being not getting its flow, not what to speak of the brain not getting enough oxygen, is which they usually go to first off. The mind's not getting its flow of prana, so it's not thinking right. And that's going to require that this body-mind complex be set up right so that prana can be mastered. That's one of the first requisites of yoga to a teacher of the Ashtanga yoga or Raja yoga. They won't usually look at the asana problem yet. They'll look at the prana problem first. And there's even what we have studied, Sadanga yoga, which is six-limbed, which leaves out the yamas and yamas as if those have already been mastered. They expect you to have nonviolence and truthfulness, ahimsa, satyam, and so forth, in hand, mastered. then you can begin to work on these sadhanga, 6 limbs of yoga that come afterward, which provide you with all the impetus to live not only a dharmic life, but an inner life, not just an inner life, an eternal life, as Jesus was talking to his disciples about. So then over the weeks we looked at prana that way, so that we can assess it and account for it, is a good word. And then we started off on a series of classes with some charts that showed you how you purified this prana. Again, sort of like the mind in its original state's already pure, but it's somehow falling into the habit of brooding and lower thought, so forth. So it begins to take on these overlays which are not its true nature. Same with the prana. If it isn't like a river free flowing, it'll begin to take on impurities and turn into a swamp and so forth instead of flow. So both prana and mind need to have this constant inward flow is good, so that the outer flow can happen naturally. So you can take your attention off the outward going senses because they're defective by nature, fastening onto the objects and getting attached to them. And that would be where pratyahara would allow you to see the source of these outer objects that are actually right there in your thoughts. Your thoughts create the objects out here, both in terms of the literal physical object and in terms of the dream object, the objects in the world that you experience. So purify the prana would mean returning it to its natural condition, and then control it, and then raise it. I would say probably focus it would be another aspect of that. And that, if you look back on that and you have it in your notes, as many of my students do, then you come upon what we started talking about in our last class or two, is about frequenting holy company. It's as if doorways then really do open once you have your body pure, your breath equalized, and this prana focused in life, and you maybe put tamas and rajas behind thee. Then all of a sudden you come to a sattvic state, and that just naturally opens doors to meeting, having meetings with unusual men, usually, or with spiritual beings, and men and women. So I remember, if I look back on my own case, becoming aware of my eating habits when I got away from my family when I was 19, and turning vegetarian and staying vegetarian and eating organically and beginning to practice some posture and some breathing. And I remember when those all became a part of my life, then I started encountering beings like Sixon, the founder of this organization. And he involved us, a lot of us younger Vedantists at the time. And of course, this would be back in the mid-70s and early 80s. He involved us in this path of Vedanta as outlined by Swami Vivekananda. Sometimes they're calling that Neo-Vedanta, or this new face of Vedanta. So in my own case, I remember that I began to encounter holy beings or holy company. And immediately after meeting him, then I came upon my guru, Swami Sheshanandaji Maharaj, peace and bliss be upon him, and got teachings of a more powerful and intense nature from him, and which set me even more resolutely on the path towards enlightenment. And from there on, it's been 50 years or more now that that lifestyle has been adhered to by yours truly, and began to share it with other people via this organization, which Sixon and a few of us younger Vedantists and some of the older school Vedantists who have long since passed also were involved in that back east. So this is all about frequenting holy company. People don't know how to value it. Like Sri Ramakrishna saying, you don't know the value of a diamond unless you're a jeweler. So you're becoming a jeweler slowly as you connect this living prana to the mind, which is really getting to the point of the title of this chart, isn't it? That these two things are really essential to outline and define and describe a true spiritual life. When sometimes you look about and you wonder about people who are on the spiritual path or saying that they're on the spiritual path, and their decisions and their words and so forth are not ringing with that truth that you heard from those beings you met in authentic holy company. And the acts shouldn't run counter to the deeds, shouldn't run counter to the words. You've heard all of that before. So all of this is becoming clear to the aspirant. And you can see that we're about to talk about again how to secure a mantra. So those are those key words that become clear. They open doors. Doors were made to be opened by mantras, we've been saying lately. So that was what we talked about the last two classes. Frequently holding kampi, selecting a guru, securing a mantra, and that rises at this, we arrive then at this third pole of psychic prana. And that's what we want to start off with today without any further ado, because these classes are about an hour and 15 minutes long, and we want to make headway towards the Shakti power itself, which is very much connected to the psychic prana and the prana. Who is it that conducts this prana? And we'd say that she's hiding in one of her grosser forms when she's flowing as prana. And then when she appears as psychic prana, she's in a subtler form. Finally, she's herself to the seers. And then they remember her from lifetime to lifetime. Te dhyan yoga nugato passion. If you've read and studied your Upanishads and memorized your meditation slokas, that they discovered the Devatma Shaktim through this very process of purifying food, energy, life force that is, and arriving at holy company, getting a mantra, and then what? See, so that's where we're at now in psychic prana fashion, because it's been mentioned by Swami Vivekananda once, as I said, and we want to look at that in terms of how subtle it is. I think this chart we'll look at first gives you an idea of how subtle it is, because it presupposes that it's always been there. Shakti will manifest through it. The prana will help you arrive to it, but the psychic prana itself has always been there. It's been what's powered your thoughts, what's powered your intellect, and what gives rise to your higher thoughts, your deeper thoughts. Also as subtle as being able to destroy negative thoughts, like mantra is supposed to do, which is the name of this series. So you find out that karmas are actually then getting destroyed here, and that's the name of the series here. So it's taken us a long time, some 7 or 8 classes, to actually get around to how mantra destroys karmas as far as the dynamics of it go. So let's plunge into it here. There's a nice picture of Shiva Nataraj there, dancing, holding out the flame of enlightenment, playing the damaru in his dance, which transcends death, and holding the boon of protection, and in that mudra of extending his left foot out towards all the beings of the world. He's also, if you can see it there, in some, maybe not in this image, he's standing on the demon of the unreal world, that is the projected world. Sometimes you see him standing upon that demon of the world. So there you see I've divided the human being at the level of psychic prana and how it can help us into these 6 categories. The first, well, actually 7, but the first, the physical, is really placed up here in the upper quote. I'm calling this cause and effect in the mind, and it says, the phenomena of causality does not apply only to physics, which unfortunately is how people are studying cause and effect only, but also to the many territories of the mind. When cause and effect is inspected, pertinent to subtle planes and physical actions, and their repercussions are traced to psychological, intellectual, mental, and emotional levels, then the indispensable science of yoga gets revealed. And its teaching on karma as well. With that in hand, the aspiring soul soon solves all problems in relativity and gets free of causality for all time. So getting beyond good and bad, pleasure and pain, life and death, virtue and vice, other subtler, even more subtler dualities like bondage and liberation, or form and formlessness. It'd be nice to just make a chart of that and see all these various dualities that plague the mind, from gross to subtle to causal, much like this chart is doing for us. So that quote is talking about how cause and effect happens on other levels of our being. Also, we could say that it's the precursor to what happens on the physical level, that everything really happens first in the realm of the mind, and then trickles out, or down, or both, into the physical world, and then we see things happening, like the huge double earthquake we had this morning here in Hawaiian Islands. I was laying down, it was very early in the morning, all of a sudden, pow, once, shake, and then pow again, shake. And everything rattled, a few things fell down. I'm not sure what the magnitude of it was. I think it's about 4.5 on the Richter. And so we get those every once in a while here in volcano land. So that kind of cause and effect is on the spiritual, on the physical level, comes from an inner cause. And we would say that shakes things up. So lots of times you'll find upheaval in the mind going on in people. And they need to know that this is not necessarily a negative thing, especially when it happens because of the karma. Because of the mantra you just received from Holy Company. See, right there you have to go back. This is one of the things people rather forget. They say good and bad things happen to them. They say, well, why did these bad things happen to me? Why don't more good things happen to me? Or they don't say, why did all this good happen to me? And if you're talking about a spiritual aspirant that becomes conscious and aware of the power of seed words, bijams, the power of Divine Mother in the Vakdevi inside the words that you're reciting quietly in your mind to destroy karmas that are impeding your path towards realization and enlightenment, then you're going to have to look at something like this. You're going to have to look back and say, oh, I see, I found Holy Company, and I secured a mantra, and I selected a teacher, and these three were because I prepared myself via prana. And you just work your way back like that, and you thank your lucky stars at that time. I just had a student yesterday write me, well, it might not be the brightest bulb in the chandelier, the person was saying, and I am having problems keeping my spiritual life going amidst work and family life, but I got the mantra, and that mantra is my saving grace, no matter what happens to me. So I like to hear that, and it means that the person values that and is doing some looking back. If you have to look back in time, that's the best way to do it. Not brood on what happened to you and rue it, you see, or maybe think that maybe it was some devil that was plaguing you. Better to think that it was your own karma that brought you there. So this is why we're talking about the physical level first, because most people are feeling the effects of these earthquakes that come from upheaval of mind due to practice of mantra, because they're reciting these key words that were given to them by holy beings. This is all looking back and putting it together. Sometimes we call this following the trail of breadcrumbs back to the source. We're going to work our way up swiftly from the bottom. So at the emotional level, let's look at cause and effect. Remember, keep psychic prana in mind. At the emotional level, cause and effect ignites anger and other passions. It can breed attachment to weakness and pity. It will heighten a false sense of security in the individual, and it will increase the tendency of oversensitivity. So you'll see this happening as basically an overall description of the emotionalism that's going on due to the cause and effect that has its seat higher than the emotions. As the emotions are not even in the heart, according to our tradition. The emotions are in the subtle body with passion, 6 passions actually, and so forth. So the way Shankara puts the emotional body with the subtle mind is very revealing to a lot of people now who are thinking, oh, maybe this is my heart that's hurting, it's my heart. But maybe you feel it in your anatomical heart, but it's really your mind that's suffering. And your mind is where the correction has to take place. You'll see that as we look at the next category quickly. Mental. Cause and effects causes obsession and with matter and objects. It increases mental imbalance. It exacerbates the problem of arrogance. And it strengthens the bond of duality. So dual mind, much different than non-dual mind, because non-dual mind is that original mind that, like the original psychic prana we're talking about now, that really look like one another. I was just reading that yesterday in the Upanishads. Prana and mind resemble each other, Asoka said. And we'll get to that more in the study of the Annapurna Upanishad when we look at it in May at our retreat. So at the mental level, you can see what cause and effect is doing to us. If the psychic prana is flowing, then emotions and mind get purified, and exactly the opposite of what you see here is going on. This will annul these kinds of problems. What about the psychological level? Cause and effect, if given into, invites dalliance with illusory perceptions. So this is where the people who have a psychic temperament run a risk. It advances curiosity in the occult powers. It plays upon false hopes and hidden fears, and it fixes awareness on mind rather than soul. Soul meaning here Atman, of course. So here you can see how cause and effect wreaks a sort of havoc of its own at the level of the intellect. So mind, intellect, thought, and ego are the fourfold package you're talking about here. We know that's called antakarana, the inner cause of things. So they think of mind as a fourfold package like that. So we're looking at that right here. Basically, the mental is the manas, and the intellectual is the buddhi, or the chitta too, the thoughts. So they get affected by this absence of the awareness and usage of psychic prana. So if your culture doesn't know anything about that, doesn't know what drives its thoughts, well, then you find people going to war and everything, and making these unwise decisions that harm and cause karma. The mantra does the opposite of that. It awakens the mind to the fact that beyond the mind is the soul. Beyond even the intelligence, the intellect is the soul, and it's the same in everyone. You've heard this teaching before in Advaita Vedanta non-duality. So this is the import that mantra can have on everyday life today, right here in the world, is that it can keep people from making these wrong decisions and causing violence, which then create karma for whole societies, what to speak of individuals. I know this from going into prisons for some 10 years and teaching Vedanta and yoga to inmates there, both men and women, and finding out their stories, how they got into prison and so forth. It was all pretty much, I concluded in the end, it was the lack of control of prana that made them do some act that placed them there in many, many cases. And they couldn't use the prana to keep the hand from stretching out and doing some violent act, or grabbing some gun or some knife, or signing some document that puts a whole nation at war, and other nonsense like that. So the mantra is the way in which to proceed, to give people that, so that they develop this, what are we just calling it, sensitivity? Or should I just leave it as a tendency of no sensitivity or oversensitivity? No balance. Yoga is balance, you see. So this is where we can start connect some of these, as we have done with this chart in years past. But right now we're taking you through these to show you the levels that psychic prana can heal. Let's look then at the next level, which is beyond the psychological into the intellectual. If the psychic prana is not flowing, and it will be if we followed this, I keep telling you, so we're doing this as a step inward ascension, I like to call this, then it will hamper the need and desire for study. Look here, the next ladder on this rung on this ladder is Contemplate the Scriptures. So that's going to be most effective after this is done. Some people jump right into the Scriptures when they still have bad habits with food, with intoxicants, with whatever, you see, and this, I think I'll help myself and read a Scripture for a while. But the prana is not flowing, the mind's not pure, the guru hasn't been consulted yet, the mantra hasn't been utilized, and here they are reading the Scriptures. So I think it's not too hard to explain that can be a problem. So if psychic prana isn't awakened and purified, made pure, like its original flow, that will hamper the need and desire for study. People will sidetrack that. They'll bypass it. Oh no, I don't need to read those old Scriptures. As Swami Vivekananda used to hear from people, but he said, I can prove to you the existence of divine reality by those old Scriptures of India. And he proceeded to do so. That's why Ramakrishna Order now has so many of the Scriptures out in so many different languages. We've never seen the like of that in a history of the world. And people can now read those Scriptures, hopefully with some qualification in mind. Psychic prana not flowing at that intellectual level also fosters the ego's notion of doership and agency. So how does one get beyond being the doer or being the agent in one's action? Because you see the next step here is self-surrender of the self. So you can see how all of this is being connected by this inward ascension that I'm talking about. Lack of psychic prana and its knowledge and use allows for the birth of misconceptions too. That is, cause and effect is wreaking its havoc upon different levels of the human being. It contributes to the pride of knowledge. There's where it's a mixed bag. You see, here's where you get to the mixed cause and effect. The sattva rajas kind of mix is that basically, I know now things, that's very good, but I'm getting prideful of it because the intellect is in conjunction now with the ego, and those two are in cahoots, and anything you learn is beginning to be possessed. So back up one step. Fosters the ego's notion of doership and agency. You see, that's where the problem began. That if you follow Sri Ramakrishna's example, you just learn and then give all knowledge back to the mother, the divine mother, the Vakdevi, the goddess of the word, the goddess who holds all these teachings, Dharini, and you give it all back to her. And therefore the ego is not going to suffer that, and the intellect's not going to become disoriented. Let's look at the philosophical level, because a level that we need to encounter according to the father of yoga, so that Bhranti Darshana, philosophical delusion, doesn't set in, because this is what will cause people to go to war. For instance, in terms of my religion is better than your religion, my God is the only God, yours is false. instead of seeing the one divine reality in all of those paths and all those religions, like Sri Ramakrishna did, then you've got this problem at the philosophical level. Cause and effect here happens. So it divides and weakens one's convictions about truth, that is, enforces false belief in relativity. That is, you think the world is real and Brahman isn't, as Vedanta would so succinctly put it. It seeds doubt and inadvertence in the mind, because those are things, we know doubt and fear are the two things that are very die-hard. They're the last to go in a spiritual aspirant's purificatory practice at this very level, when one needs the courage of one's convictions. It stymies crucial ideological conclusions. That's called Vedanta Siddhanta, and I started out chanting that in this class. Vedanta Siddhanta is the conclusion, Siddhanta, of the Vedanta is that all is Brahman. So this kind of realization, this kind of great statement called a Mahavakya, will get stymied if the psychic prana isn't alive and flowing and maintained. I'd say that that might be one of the harder practices at this level of the game. Spiritual practice is to keep those truths that you've won through so much study and meditation current day by day. Keep them as your penultimate goals for realizing truth or self, divine self. There's one more level to consider here, and that's the spiritual level itself. Cause and effect there, due to lack of psychic prana doing its work, resists the soul's turn towards peace. Very important again, I won't repeat it today, but then so that you'll know that war is not only not a recourse, it's just not allowed. Everything else must be tried before that. If it's impossible to resist it, like say in the Mahabharata war, in the Gita, so forth, then you've done your best towards maintaining peace, like our Buddhist brother Thich Nhat Hanh, who passed away about 50 days ago now, or 55 days ago, because on the 49th day we attended service with him. So we want to make sure that the soul doesn't resist this turn towards peace, that it's not just an option, it's the only option, and needs to be stood up for against people who don't have this prana and psychic prana flowing in them to any great degree, and are giving in to these compromises that are unacceptable to truth, peace, and life. Cause and effect will also promote religious narrowness in religions. That's why the spiritual category is one of the most important, and it's very practical. It's not a transcendental spirituality Vedanta is talking about here, and the way Vivekananda presented it particularly, it's specific exactly to the way the world, the physical world itself, runs and should run, and the way people should live their lives. Like I was just saying, read that quote today about him saying that you should become the master of this body-mind mechanism, not just gather in cities and live a foolish life. It's a direct quote from him. So there's other purposes than activities that you do at the physical level, but you have to bring this living Vedanta right down here and out into the physical. And then you can call yourself a Vedantist. And then you're not treading on the backs of the poor via competition and going to war with neighbors and neighboring nations and so forth, which is just giving in to this void where psychic prana hasn't reached yet. It's a darkness in the mind. You're making decisions from a dark mind. And we've seen that happen far too much in the history of the world. The penultimate point here undermines the truth of formlessness. You can see how it gets subtler and subtler. People maybe are not ready for formlessness yet, for the most part, you'll find monastics are, and particularly monastics that come from Vedanta or from Buddhism, they're ready for formlessness and they've understood it. So you can see how important the flow of prana from a very basic level right on through to the psychic prana, that's called this prana that's guiding our being on all 5 levels of these 6 levels of this chart that we're talking about, into the psychic prana, right into knowledge of the Divine Mother herself, she who since birth has always led us on through paths of trouble to perfection's goal. Mother wise in her own sweet and playful ways. So if we want to awaken to that Mother, that Shakti or Mahashakti, so that we can, and I'll give you a little peek ahead here, meditate on the Lord in form, attain samadhis, and meditate on Brahman itself, help souls out of bondage, then that's under the auspice of the hand of Divine Mother of the Universe. So that's where these 4 points at the spiritual level around cause and effect and the psychic prana that can neutralize cause and effect there are very important. First is rather a soul's individual peace. The second was religious universality, and the third is formlessness. That's the open space beyond religions. Finally, to end up here at this final point, it deposits subtle samskaras in the mind. So then we're getting into this tendency to be reborn again in ignorance, as opposed to or contrasted to the option that we have to be born in a fully conscious state. Should a man be reborn? Yeah, Swami Vivekananda, when he was here and in the body, I certainly hope he will not. He said, not until he can do so in full consciousness. So here's a list of full consciousness for you, but we're proposing it here at the level of the lack of the flow of prana, psychic prana, and how to remedy it. Basically, it's do your purificatory exercises, open the doors to find your God with form, because you're going to be meditating on that later, and then secure that mantra that you've had all your lifetimes if you're a seeker, and use it to break open this problem of cause and effect, good, bad, pleasure, pain, life, death. They're called dualities, or dvandva mohena, deluding pairs of opposites, they're called in Vedanta, in the Gita by Sri Krishna too. So you can see now we've really rounded this corner of psychic prana and ushered ourselves or projected ourselves into this arena that's coming next. And I think we just read the quote on the bottom here, and we will have done a quick pass through cause and effect in terms under the umbrella of what psychic prana can do for us when it flows. So Vivekananda's quote here is, knowledge is action. First action, then reaction. When the mind perceives, then as reaction, it wills. The will is in the mind. And then, of course, beyond mind, he would often say, is intelligence, not intellect, which is a holder of intelligence, but intelligence itself at a very high vibratory or even non-vibratory level, where intelligence is the first compound of consciousness, he would say. Intelligence, the first compound of consciousness. Prior to that would then, down the ladder, would become this willpower. So he's putting it in the proper order here. So I hope this has introduced you into the realm of psychic prana and how the prana that causes the body to act, causes the senses to see, hear, touch, taste, and smell, and then finally how it conduces to the health of the body and the purification of the emotions, finally becomes situated in the mind. Where does the prana actually come from? comes out of the Atman like a shadow of a man. They call that in the Upanishads. Prajna Upanishad says that very beautifully. But it's under the auspice of this power of Shakti. See, that's her intelligence you're talking about. So you want to treat it very reverently. Now, as we move on to conduct some worship here, then you'll have to remember back on some of these teachings we took last week about the luminary, the guru, and the mantra, and so forth. But to conduct worship then is going to be very much connected to contemplating Scripture, so you know what it is that you're worshiping. So this is where Bhakti and Jnanam become the two wings of the bird. As my teacher used to say, devotion and higher knowledge become the two wings of the bird. And the bird can fly only with two wings. So you don't want to leave the human being with all its levels of potential here only to the devotional side of things, which might become a little bit too emotional, or only to the knowledge side of things, which might tend to become too dry. And I'm following Swami Vivekananda's words here, but you want to blend these two together so that devotion will, in its deep feeling, sensitivity we're calling it here, or transcendence of insensitivity, will then inform knowledge of the true heart of mankind. And the knowledge will then open the mind to true vision and realization. That's where we're headed with this. So, so that we move along here, let's look at how the Scriptures are seen in India. Because unlike, I think, well, let's not divide it into hemispheres, but we can say unlike levels of religion that are still fundamentalist and narrow, is one of the things we were trying to escape when the psychic prana rises in it, is any kind of narrowness in religion. So unlike that, the seers of India have always talked about the Scriptures as having these secrets. And if you have these secrets in you, in mind, in your knowledge, when you enter into them, then they become a matter of great inspiration for you. So I've put here, and you see Shankara and some of his direct disciples sitting in the back on that image. Put here some of the most important secrets of Scriptures as pronounced by the Indian seers. There you see first the three great sources above. Consulting the revealed Scriptures, instructions from a preceptor, verification by one's own experience. Sometimes called the three great sources, Vidya Shastra, Guru Anushasana, and Aparoksha Anubhuti. There's even a scripture by Shankara titled that, One's Own Direct Spiritual Experience, Aparoksha Anubhuti, which he wrote, as it were, and about the great experiences he had in his 32 years of life, fully realized soul who had recalled everything from the Scriptures when he was still a teenager or younger. They also want you to know that there are three techniques for interpreting Scripture, and these happen to coincide nicely with psychic prana, because people who have opened the psychic prana, they're aware of these ways of interpreting Scriptures, and they can select the highest and deepest one, and then the others they can use as concessions to understand people who haven't yet understood, say, non-duality. As Vivekananda said, you can proceed from dualism to qualified non-dualism to non-dualism. Those are three steps that you go inward with, philosophically speaking. So it's much like that here with the interpretation of Scriptures. The first is called Prati Tantra Siddhanta. That is, people sometimes look at religions and Scriptures as separate doctrines from one another. That happens not only amidst religions, but inside of any one given religion, there are people who will select one particular path or sampradaya or sect, and they'll focus just upon that to the exclusion of all others. And so that is a narrow way of interpreting it. Then you have what's called Sarvathantra Siddhanta. Remember, Siddhanta means a conclusion, so you're making certain conclusions about the way the scriptures are telling you about the nature of reality. So this is by way of reconciliation. So some people come forward and say, let's not argue about this, let's reconcile our views. And so that's a medium grade kind of understanding. But the great souls move deeper to this Sahaja Tantra Siddhanta, which is by way of natural synthesis. And that's the way a great soul coming to earth, like Shankara, would see immediately these various scriptures as being expressions of the One. And they're all naturally synthesized, and just like a diamond has different facets. So in that way, they speak in discourse, like Shankara used to do, from that highest position. Then they can come down to qualified non-dualism, or down to reconciling people's differences, like Sri Ramakrishna does in the Gospel. A lot of people from different sampradayas were coming to him, and they would sometimes be a little stiff and argumentative in each other's company, but Sri Ramakrishna was there in the middle of it, always directing them towards reconciliation and trying to see beyond their view. So this is the universal nature of a great soul like that. It'd help people to know that there are two types of knowledge: spiritual and revelatory. It's called Paravidya, and religious, secular, and intellectual is called Aparavidya. So I mentioned that already earlier in this class. There at the bottom of the class, of the chart, 4 views on the origin of Scripture. Starting at the bottom, some people think Scripture comes from the human intellect, and it's not unnatural to see why they would think that. But you must know that there are 3 other opinions here. One is more well thought, means archa, it's coming from the seers. The seers come to earth. Ordinary people aren't usually very adequate in their interpretation is the word, or interpretation of the scriptures. And so it's better to fall in the lap of the seers and let them explain it to you. But the seers will say it's Ishvariya. Actually, the scriptures come from Ishvara. So this pertains to our chart here on Mana, Prana, Sambandha, is that the closer you're getting to the source of knowledge, which is the Shakti herself, Divine Mother, the more you're seeing Ishvara here and meditating on Ishvara as the source of these great teachings. And that's why they're going to be calling them eternal eventually. When they see Ishvara and see that Ishvara, or a great avatar like Sri Ramakrishna Paramahansa, has an unlimited source of these scriptures within him, and he's putting them at the feet of the Shakti, Divine Mother, then they call that aparashaya. It's of divine eternal origin, and that's where you get beyond phases of time and locations in space and individuals like intellectuals, seers, and realized souls. These are all partitions, as it were, all leading to this one truth of the divine eternal origin of these scriptures. They'll come back in time and resurface. And Jesus has said as much about the teachings of the prophets in his religion, and Sri Ramakrishna has proved as much with, as I was just saying, the Ramakrishna order's offering of Jnana wisdom now in this day. In so many different languages you can find these teachings now in a very short time. The 2 here at the bottom are very nice because they're just different ways in different periods of India's time frame that they explained them. On the left, I'm calling it the 3 potent practices. You should listen, all ears, to the teachers, it's the Guru you just found, for instance, and the mantra that he gave you in holy company. And you should be very quiet, go inward and listen deeply. Then you should contemplate what you hear, and then realize it, without halting or without any kind of procrastination. This has to be done right away while the getting's good. So this is called the three potent practices: Shravana, Manana, Nididhasana. And then the three proofs of truth are similar to that, called in a different period Shruti, Yukti, and Anubhava. So that's to hear the truth, to reason about it, and then to experience it. So you can see how none of these first four elements leave you are left alone. You're always going towards personal realization of what you hear and getting experience of truth yourself, rather than just hearing and walking away, or even thinking about it a little bit. And this goes back to contemplating scriptures and conducting worship together, which you'll see are the two wings of the bird. Lord Vashishta has something beautiful to say about this. Atmagyan scriptures, that's the scriptures of the highest wisdom, treat self-knowledge and lead to divine wisdom. Ordinary shastras treat terrestrial wisdom and lead to further bondage. But even the Atmagyan scriptures will be non-productive if the imp of lower mind attached to conventional and secular knowledge is not exercised thoroughly. So he's wanting you to enter into all three levels of understanding of the scriptures. And speaking about Lord Vashishta and moving on, let's look next here at what this knowledge, or Atmagyan he's talking about, really is all about. And he mentions in this scripture, Yoga Vashishta, which is his own path of yoga. He's a very ancient and very well-known rishi of truth, a seer. And in the Yoga Vashishta, he talks about the story of the great Bali and how he teaches his son. So you can see that the whole emphasis here is being put upon jnana, wisdom, to contemplate scripture. And you can see how this is nicely tucked in between surrender of self and conducting worship. So this is where you'll see great souls who have non-dual truth in mind, yet they're continuing on, they have an ishtam, and they're continuing on with their worship all the same. We saw our Swami Ashishananda that way, would be speaking non-duality from the podium in the morning, and then in the evening would be offering flowers to the altar to Sri Ramakrishna and Holy Mother. So the beautiful way in which he put together Advaita and Dvaita was very impressive, and impressed itself deeply upon us, so that we didn't, as some may, revert back to this problem of argumentative intellect, separating two sides of the coin, and not even bothering to reconcile bhakti and jnanam, but that saw that we're being taught actually by example, when the Swami was on the podium and in the shrine room, of this truth of the two wings of the bird. And we saw it right in action there, so that really convinced us. So there you see the attainment of the rare jnanam. I've put this taken it out of the scripture and put it in these four categories: people's opinions, the world, study and meditation, and worship of the Guru. So there you see study and meditation here, and worship of the Guru here, right side by side. So there are these levels of it then. Those who possess jnanam, they've actually heard the truth, as we talked about in this last chart, those ones that put one part of the mind on study of scriptures, which treat Atmic reality, they put one part of the mind on the study of methods to remove desire. They put one part of the mind on the study of the ways of self-cognition, and one part of the mind on the path of how to best worship the Guru. Those who are only partially familiar with Jnanam, or Jnana Yoga, declare this. They give one part of the mind to the world, and they give one part of the mind to study and meditation, and they give one part of the mind to worship of the Guru. So you see the difference between those who actually possess Jnanam and those who are only partially familiar with Jnanam. And the scene for Jnanam here gets worse, because there are those who are unacquainted with Jnana Yoga, and must say that we see a lot of those in the West today who are practicing just Bhakti Yoga, for instance, or just meditation. Dhyan Yoga and Bhakti Yoga with no Jnana Yoga in it at all. So this is a great seer talking about the huge import of Jnana Yoga, which we're calling here on this chart, contemplating the scriptures, which is one of the great things that can happen when the living prana gets connected to the illumined mind in this way of proceeding. It's a great path. So what happens to those who are unfamiliar with Jnana Yoga? They give two parts of the mind to the world, one part of the mind to study and meditation, and one part of the mind to the worship of the Guru. And so you can see that looking back up to those who possess Jnana Yoga, how they've arrived at this realization through the path of wisdom, and how things have expanded out for them. And they've been much more effective in using this psychic prana we're talking about to flow through all levels of their being, like we looked at the physical, emotional, and mental, intellectual, psychological, philosophical, and spiritual levels of that chart earlier. And so they really are conducting a life of Jnanam and Bhakti together. Shankara, we just looked at, would sing it this way. You think an Advaitist doesn't have Bhakti or doesn't practice worship, then let's listen to what Shankara says about it in his own Stotram to Shiva. Ratnai kalpita asanam himajal shnanam chadivya baram nanaratna bhivusitam mriganadamodan kitam chandanam jati champapa bilvabhatra rachitam pushpam chadupam tata deepam deva dayanide Pashipate hritkalpitam garitatam, which means, O Shiva, here before thee is a bath filled with refreshing waters, scented with rare oils and healing unguents. Rising afterwards, please accept this royal robe, studded with precious gems for thy comfort. I have mixed pure sandalwood paste with fragrant musk, and now long to place it upon thy feet and brow. Sacred jati flowers and champaka blossoms I also offer to thee, and holy bilva leaves as well. Your radiant form I now encircle with bright flames, and pleasing incense. Now please accept this royal seat, O Lord of infinite mercy, a throne bedecked with the priceless jewels of my heartfelt devotion. So this is an Advaita Vedantist telling you about the worship that he does in his mind to Lord Shiva, which actually is done right here in the altar that I'm looking at behind the camera on Puja days. And you do these very things. You offer sacred water, you offer rare oils for the bath in the water, and pure sandal paste with musk, jati flowers, champaka blossoms, a garland around the neck, holy vilva leaves as well, very important if you have them. Your radiant form now, the radiant form of Shiva now gets encircled by bright flames. So this could be done right before the image of Shiva, like the lingam, or Nataraj, statue of Nataraj and so forth. So you're doing this sacred worship. And it wouldn't have become possible, you see, if you hadn't have come to know who the Lord was through Jnanam. Because isn't it the psychic prana that's flowing through the mind that allows you to envision this puja? This is called the Shiva Manassa Puja Stotram. So it goes on like Salvarne Navaratna Kanda Rachite Patrigritam Payasham. You know what Payasham means? You're offering rice pudding to him. And you're also feeding him with 5 types of nutritious foods. Ripe bananas, sweet curd, green vegetables, fresh water with honey, camphor scent in the water, sacred payasham and rice pudding complete the royal meal, served on a polished shining bowl inlaid with gold and mother of pearl. Spiced betel leaves now are offered for thy enjoyment. All these have been prepared mentally with great devotion, so please accept my humble worship, Shankara says. One of his lesser known stotrams that show us very definitely how this bhakti, devotion, not only just comes together nicely with Jnana, but that the two are rather inseparable. And all based in this class, the main emphasis of this class, the accent has been on the awakening of psychic prana that has connected body to devotion or emotions, to mind, mental, to psychological, to philosophical, right on up to the spiritual level. You can see how all of these need to be meditated upon deep within the heart. And so this two wings of the bird spiritual phenomena can occur to us. And that psychic prana can move on inward toward what we'll look at next week, which is called performing work as worship. So this is where the Vedanta comes around full circle. I think I want to show you some teachings of the 4 yogas next week, particularly with the accent on karma yoga, the yoga of action, because that will bring us up to this very feet of the Shakti herself, and leave us then to contemplate these final few rungs of the ladder. So all of this has been based in this arrival point of psychic prana, which is scarcely talked about in the scriptures. It's inferred quite a bit, but it all starts out with the awakening of prana itself, as far as we're concerned, with food and strength and breathing. And so it follows the yogic limbs very well in this way, and then goes deeper into purifications of different kinds, like are listed in this beautiful stotram, how the pujari has thought about all this and then gone and prepared everything with the mantra in mind. And mantra then comes with the guru and holy company, and they sit there in the puja too and worship. And then this all leads to this inspiration, if you want to call psychic prana that. All of a sudden a person feels very inspired to be reading the scriptures. Whereas if the scriptures occurred to them back in the purificatory stages, how long did they last? Or did they understand the secrets of the scriptures before the prana had turned into psychic prana? And once it did turn into psychic prana, all these secrets became known. And all the levels of one's being then became subject to the psychic prana, and all the problems that we listed here at the first of the class get rectified, neutralized. And so, to conclude, this is how mantra destroys karma. The very power of it in there, in the awakening of the body-mind mechanism to higher levels of its own existence, sweeter, less denser, more subtle levels of vibration that the mind has access to if this prana is not crimped up or dull and is awakened like kundalini power is up the spine, because this is also another connection we could make from this system of mana pranaha sambandha into the kundalini centers and how that works. That's also the province of Vedanta too, because there's an Upanishad called the Yoga Kundalini Upanishad, which describes a lot of this need for purifying the prana before we get started. So when we understand all this, and for next week's class, which could be the final class of this series, we'll take up this last corner here. Perform work as worship, and then you've offered everything that has been purified by prana and bhakti and jnana, devotion and wisdom, to her, right on down to work as worship or labor as love. And then you can meditate. So that's what we'll be looking at next week. Om Tatsinayo Ravrini Mehe Gatung Yogyaya Gatung Yena Pate Daivi Swastarastu Naha Swastir Manusevyaha Urdvam Jagatu Bhesajam Sangno Astu Dvipade Sang Chatushpate Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May we make a humble offering of the small self into the great self. May we always rejoice in this offering. May we always delight in worship of the gods and the Divine Mother of the universe. May peace then come upon us and to the entire human race, where healing, health, and well-being also abide among us. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us. May peace be unto all. Om Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om Tat Sat.